It's 8 lines from the bottom on Gimel Amud Bet, about 8 lines. Yep. Anyway, and just a word because about what we just did yesterday. So yesterday we dealt with the issue of how you know we've got about what exactly is a true and two interpretations of a true either a moan or a wail, which gives us the idea of either 3 medium-sized voices, or the way we interpret it, it was a confusing Gemara, but the way we interpret it is either 3 staccato sounds or maybe 9. Maybe it's the same length as we've assumed, but except for these medium-sized sounds, each one is really 3 staccato sounds. So the general assumption that we tend to work with, although if you remember from the Gemara yesterday, it was not exactly clear what the Gemara was saying all the time, but anyway, is that 9 sort of staccato sounds, 9 beats, da 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 da, is what one interpretation of a trua is, what we call a trua. A shvarim is 3 sounds, each one 3 of those beats, and a tekiah is 1 straight sound for the entire 9 beats. That tends to be our assumption, and based on the psukim of saying trua 3 times, you're going to need 3 sets, and we're going to learn out in a minute that the tekiah comes before and after. You're going to need 3 sets of tekiah, trua, tekiah. Now, all of that this gets you 9 sounds. Once we've introduced a question as to what the trua is, assuming that you've got to now do both versions, because we don't know, we haven't said that yet, but assuming that we would do that, that would get you 18 sounds. That's still nowhere towards our normal idea of 100 sounds. We know what's going to be introduced is the possibility that it's both. So it's both a shvarim and a trua, so that's fine. That'll get you 27. If we count shvarim trua as 2, which is an interesting debate, that'll get you 30. But even so, 30 sounds is not going to get you our 100 sounds. So let's note that, and we'll circle back to that. But right now, we are with this is our base, okay, and 2 possible interpretations of what a trua is. So let's take a look at the Gemara, okay, which is going to deal with some of these issues. How you know how many truas, how you know that tekiah comes before and after, and so on. Tanu Rabbanan, our rabbis taught, Minayin shebeshofar. How do you know it's a shofar, right? The Torah only says by Rosh Hashanah, Yom Tru'ah, or Zichron Tru'ah. It never mentions a shofar. Maybe it's with a chatzotros. Talmud Lomar, Be'avartar Shofar Tru'ah. It says by the Yovel, you shall pass or you shall sound a shofar of blasts. Aim Yel Yovel. Fine, that's for Yovel. Rosh Hashanah Minayin. How do you know it applies to Rosh Hashanah? Talmud Lomar, B'chodesh HaShvi'i. It says, B'yom HaKippurim, and then it says B'chodesh HaShvi'i B'esor LaChodesh. So why do you need? Talmud Lomar B'chodesh HaShvi'i. You don't have to tell me it's the 7th month. If it's Yom Kippur, of course it's the 7th month. Uma Talmud Lomar B'chodesh HaShvi'i. So why does it say that? Shiu Kol Truot Chodesh HaShvi'i Zeh Kizeh. To tell you that anytime you do a blasts on the 7th month, not only on Yovel, but even when you do it on Rosh Hashanah, it should all be of the same nature, and therefore that Chodesh HaShvi'i, that extra Chodesh HaShvi'i, allows us to apply Yovel to Rosh Hashanah and to tell us that we use a shofar. Okay, so that's one thing we learn out from Yovel, that we use a shofar. Minayin shepshuta lefaneha. Now we get to the next thing, because all we know is an idea of trua. How do we know, as I've drawn on the board, that a straight sound, a tekiah, precedes every trua? Every time the Torah says trua, it means with a tekiah coming before it. Talmud Lomar, the verse teaches, "V'havarta shofar truah." You shall sound a shofar of truah. So before you get to the truah, you get v'havarta, and havarta is being read as an additional sound, or maybe somehow as a straight sound, and therefore that comes before the truah. Where do you know that every time there's a truah, a straight sound comes afterwards? Talmud Lomar, ta'aviru shofar. So you shall sound a shofar, which comes out Varta shofar to Chodesh. Yom Kippurim ta'aviru shofar. So havarta comes before the word truah, and ta'aviru comes after the word truah, to tell you that there's a straight sound before and a straight sound after. Okay, so you have 3 truahs with tekiyahs before and after. That's the idea. Now, by the way, of those 3 truahs, 2 of them are by Rosh Hashanah, Yom Truah Zichron Truah, and 1 is by Yovel. So we still have to, Vavarta Shofar Truah, you still have to ask how you're going to, get them all together in the same place. Okay, so, Vein Liela Yovel. All I know is that on the Yovel, you have a tekiah before and after, because those psukim of Havarta and Ta'aviru are by the Yovel. Rosh Hashanah Minayin, how do I know on Rosh Hashanah as well that when you have a tekiah, when you have a truah, you have a tekiah before and after? Talmud Lomar B'chodesh HaShvi'i. Once again, that extra Chodesh HaShvi'i that it says by Yovel, which is superfluous, top of Lamed Daled Lamed Aleph. Shein Talmud Lomar Chodesh HaShvi'i, there's not a need to say it. Uma Talmud Lomar Chodesh HaShvi'i, so why did it say it? Sheyu Kol Chuos Chodesh HaShvi'i, Zek is that, to tell you to make an equation of anything that's all the blasts on the 7th month on Tishrei. So since on Yovel, it's with a shofar, and since on Yovel, it's with a tkiyah before and after, those two things are also true by Rosh Hashanah. Okay? How do you get 3 sets? Right? Because we know 2 psukim of Tru'ah are by Rosh Hashanah and 1 is by Yovel. Shofar Tru'ah, that's by Yovel. Shapson Zichron Tru'ah, Yom Tru'ah Yelachem, 2 by Rosh Hashanah. Now, very nice, but why don't we say you have 2 blasts on Rosh Hashanah and 1 on Yovel? How do we know to group them all together? How do you know to group them all together? Because it says the 7th month by Rosh Hashanah and it says it by Yovel, we learn to apply them all to one another. Similar to what we did before. Before we did it by the superfluous B'chodesh HaShvi'i. Now we're doing it by the fact that we're making a Gzeira Shava. But either way, what we're doing is we're saying apply Yovel to Rosh Hashanah and vice versa. So from Yovel we learn out Tkiyah before and after and a true, and we learn how to do a shofar. And from combining Yovel and Rosh Hashanah, we learn that each one of those, both Yovel and Rosh Hashanah, gets 3 truot. And if it's getting 3 truot, you're applying all the psukim to both, and you're getting Tkiyahs before and Tkiyahs after each one of those truot. 1 minute. Where were we? Haketza, Shalosh Shein Teisha. So you get to 3 truas, and since we've already introduced the idea of a tkiyah before and after, you're getting 3 which really are 9. 3 sets, because each trua is accompanied with a tkiyah before and after. Shir tkiyah kitruah. The length of a tkiyah is like the length of a trua. That's, we quoted that part of the Braita before, which will be, let's say, 3 medium sounds or 9 short sounds. And shir kitruah kishalosha shvarim. And a trua is the size of 3 medium sounds. Okay, so again, the way we read it, we'll read it the way that says that means that a trua is 3 shvarim, 3 medium sounds. Okay, so now the Gemara just has one question. Originally, we applied Yovel to Rosh Hashanah by a hekesh. It says, B'chodesh HaShvi'i, the extra Shvi'i told you everything in the 7th month is the same. So the words HaChodesh HaShvi'i is to tell you, treat them all the same. The Hashta Maisi La B'Gzeira Shava, so why now do you need a Gzeira Shava to put all 3 truot together? So the Gemara says, Hachikama, this is what it's saying. Idlav Gzeira Shava, we actually have a Gzeira Shava. But if it weren't for the Gzeira Shava, Havi Maisina La Be'Hekesha, we could have done it with the Hekesh of Chodesh HaShvi'i. So one way or the other, we're going to link them all together. I mean, the little bit of a difference is that when we were just using Chodesh HaShvi'i, the idea was apply Yovel to Rosh Hashanah. Take what it says in A and apply it to B. When we use the Gzeira Shava, we're being a little bit more radical. What we're saying is combine A and B and apply it to both. So it's a little bit more different, and maybe that's why we felt the need of the Gzeira Shava.
Is there some preferencing of a Gzeira Shava over a Hekesh in terms of authority here?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Meaning, a Gzeira Shava, on the one hand, you need more of a tradition for it. On the other hand, it's less susceptible to sort of to a rational critique. So if you look at Rashi says, where's Rashi? Hachikamar, Ilav Gzeira Shava, like a third from the bottom. Ilo Nema Gzeira Shava Zula, Moshe Misinai, Ladono. If I did not have a tradition going all the way to Sinai, I see maybe Hakol Be'Hakesha, Kolomer Me'atzma. I could have figured it out by myself because Hakesha is more something I could derive by myself. Mm-hmm. So the strength of Hakesha is that you don't need the tradition. The strength of Gzeira Shava is because it's relatively arbitrary. It's more impervious to a type of a rational critique. Okay, so anyway, that's where we get it from B'chodesh HaShvi'i, linking Yovel to Rosh Hashanah, and Taviru and Vavarta gets us a Tkiyah before and after. Yes, Charlie.
Both sides of this Gzeira Shava are being used here for other things. That normally would cause the Gemara to start attacking it.
What do you mean? Chodesh HaShvi'i is not used for other things. Chodesh HaShvi'i, at least by Yovel, is extra. Because once it says Yom Kippurim, you don't need it to say Chodesh HaShvi'i. That was how we started with. So that certainly is extra. and the Chodesh HaShvi'i by Rosh Hashanah, maybe that's not as extra. But
Yeah,
okay, it's
that's what I
Gzeir
meant.
It's still Mufna Mitzad Echad,
Okay.
so all right. Anyway, so the Gemara says,
But I'm surprised they didn't discuss that.
yeah, we're not so interested in critiquing this. I mean, we sort of know where we're going here, and the question is how to get there. Okay, so the Gemara says like this: the high Tana, so that basically learns out the idea of a tekiah before and after, pretty much everything from Yovel, but specifically also tekiah before and after. The high Tana Maisi Lo B'Gzeir Shava Mi Midbar, but the following Tana makes a lot of those learnings not from Yovel, but from what we know in the Midbar, meaning what we know by the Chatzotzrot, specifically the idea of the tekiah before and after. So let's take a look. The Tanya Mikal Brisa, Utkatem Tru'ah. This is by the by the Chatzotzrot. You shall blow a Tru'ah. Okay, so what does that mean? It means before you blow a tru'ah, the fact that it uses the verb utkatem is what we're going to say, not the hareyotem tru'ah. That would have been a more normal thing to say, right? Use the verb that has the word tru'ah as its root. The hareyotem tru'ah. Why does it say utkatem tru'ah? So that's to tell you that when you're going to blow a tru'ah, it's going to be preceded by a tkiyah. Okay, and that's why it uses the verb utkatem. So tkiyah b'fnei atzma, tru'ah b'fnei atzma. You'll have a tkiyah preceding the tru'ah. This is by the Chatzotzrot. Atom tkiyah b'fnei atzma, tru'ah b'fnei atzma. Oeino tkiyah v'tru'ah achasi. Maybe it's really just saying blow a tru'ah, and tkiyah is just a verb. No, kishomer uva'akila takahal titku v'lo tariu. Since it says when you're gathering the congregation, as opposed to when you're moving them forward, again by the Chatzotzrot, you should do a tkiyah and you should not do a teru'ah. And there, the verb tru'ah is used as a verb. Right, you should blow rather than, I don't know what the other verb would be, but anyway, okay, but shatter or something like that. Anyway, so there it has a verb for tru'ah. So if it wanted to just say blow a tru'ah, it would have said v'hareyotem tru'ah. It knows how to use the word tru'ah as a verb because it says titku v'lo tariu. So so since it doesn't say that and it says utkatem tru'ah. That tells you that the use of the verb utkatem is to tell you that even when you're doing a tru'ah, it has to be preceded with a tikiyah. How do you know that? Okay. So now we're just going to unpack this. How do you know that the tikiyah comes first? The word tikiyah precedes the word teruah. How do you know that a tikiyah also comes after tru'ah? You shall. So then the verb tkiyah comes after tru'ah. So again, the use of the word tkiyah is strained by the teruah, and we're interpreting it to mean you do a tkiyah sound, and therefore, because that verb comes before and after, it means a tkiyah both before and after.
What do you mean by pshuta? What do you mean by
pshuta? Is a straight, unbroken sound.
That's tkiyah. The tkiyah is pshuta.
Yeah. Rabbi Yishmael ben Rosh Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Omer. Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, says, "Eino tzarich." You don't need the extra pasuk to tell you a tkiyah comes after. Harehu Omer utkatem tru'ah shenit. It says, and you shall blow another tru'ah. That's when you're moving the camps forward. Shein tamid lomo shenit. It doesn't have to say second. I can count. You said one, then say and do it again. I mean, why do you have to say the word second? Umatam lomo shenit. Why is it telling me second? Zebnei this is a paradigm. Shekom makom shenemar tru'ah. Anytime it says tru'ah, teit tkiyah shni'ah la. So utkatem tru'ah shenit means you shall make a tkiyah second following the teruah. That's how you read it. I don't know. I thought the first limud was a little more straightforward. Excuse me. Excuse me. Yeah, that's up there. Okay. So anyway, that's how you know by the Chatzotzrot. Again, it is interesting. Oh, thank you. It is interesting to speculate, to think about what is this idea of a tkiyah coming before and after. Why is that such a, if the focus is on tru'ah, what is that idea? And I've already mentioned to you Ramban's point, which is a little bit reflected in the Chatzotzrot, right? A tru'ah is used when it's a bad day, it's like used to call out to God, and the tkiyah is used on a happy day, right? It says, so tkiyah really represents something more positive, rejoicing, happy. Tru'ah represents more sense of shattering or anguish or tsar, so that the idea, as we've been talking about, the Rosh Hashanah has both of those themes. themes, and therefore maybe there's an aspect, obviously a central aspect of like a Yom Hadin and a day of of a feeling like calling out to God in anguish, but on the other hand, it's enveloped with that much more positive sense of rejoicing and confidence and so on. Like we don't say slichos on Rosh Hashanah, right? So there's no like tachanu, there's no avinu malkeinu, all of that stuff really starts after Rosh Hashanah. So it's an interesting balance, like of those two themes. So it's one, so still maybe one is like the central, but it's enveloped with the other. And another way of saying that is like sort of a sense of like rachamim. It's din berachamim. It is a yom hadin, but it's obviously enveloped with rachamim. So those are, I think, some core ideas of what this idea of tekiah coming before and after sort of signifies.
Chatzot is not ledorot. Is that correct?
Well, it is for korbanot, but there is an idea of the chatzot for the korbanot. That's uvemordechem, v'rashei chatzichem, and so on. Okay, so the Gemara continues. Okay, now Eli Ela B'Midbar. I know this idea of tekiah before and after by the chatzot in the wilderness. Rosh Hashanah minayin. How do you know it on Rosh Hashanah? Talmud Lomar truah l'gzeira shava. So here it says truah chatem truah. By Rosh Hashanah it says yom truah yelachem. So again, we link the two. Again, as Charlie pointed out, no questioning here about how you don't have really the words true as extra, but okay. V'sholosh truot nemru b'Rosh Hashanah. Now we're going to get to the idea of three. Before we got the idea of three of incorporating Yovel, but here we've been ignoring Yovel. So how are you going to get the idea of three? Shabson zichron truah, yom truah, and vavarta shofar truah. So we said three, it says by Rosh Hashanah, but really one of them we're copying from Yovel. Okay, so that's back to our three. V'shtei tkiyot l'kol achat v'achat. And each one has a tekiah before and after. Matzino l'meidim, so comes to the conclusion, shalosh truot for sheish tekiyot, nemru Rosh Hashanah, 3 truot and 6 tekiyot. Shtayim midi. By the way, it's interesting to frame it that way because that makes it sound like it's just 9 voices. Like I could do 6 tekiyot all in a row and then 3 truot, which is not true. Obviously, the whole idea is a set of tekiah, truot, tekiah. There actually is a position of Rabbi Yehuda that says that you cannot have a breath between tekiah, trua, and tekiah, between those sounds. They really are one unified sound. Even the rabbis that argue on Rabbi Yehuda say it might not be one unified sound, but it still is it's a set. And that gets to the issue of, let's say the Baal Tokeya makes a mistake in the middle, like he does a shvarim that doesn't count as a shvarim. It's too short or something like that. Does he go back to the tekiah or does he repeat the shvarim? There are opinions that he has to go back to the tekiah because now it won't be a set of tekiah, shvarim, tekiah. It'll be a set of tekiah, random sound, shvarim, tekiah, and that's not the unit. So that's why, sometimes
Here they don't do that.
Here they don't do that. Here they repeat. I've never heard them go back to a tekiah. There are, look, part of the question is also if it's really like, what makes it a bad sound or what just makes it like not, it's just, you discard it. Like it didn't even count as anything, but there are definitely some circumstances where some people will say you have to go back to the tekiah because it has to be a set without any wrong sounds in the middle. So we're going to get to that in the Gemara when the Gemara is going to ask, why don't you just do tekiah, shvarim, trua, tekiah? Then you can count as tekiah, shvarim, tekiah, trua, tekiah, and tekiah, shvarim, trua, tekiah. Like that can count as all 3 possibilities. And the Gemara basically says no, because if it's only one of those sounds, the other one is interrupting. So you clearly get that sound that you can't have a wrong sound that interrupts the set. So it is important to conceptualize it as 3 sets. Shalosh, shalosh, shalosh. Okay? Now it says, however, introduces a new idea. Shtay midivrei Torah v'achat midivrei sofrim. 2 are biblical and 1 is rabbinic. Now, what does that mean? So I would have said the one that's rabbinic is the one we're learning from Yovel. The 2 that are biblical are the 2 that it says by Rosh Hashanah, right? Because one of the psukim is by Yovel. Let's see what it says. Shabson zichron trua v'avarta shofar trua midivrei Torah. So it's going to say a different tack. No, Shabson zichron trua, which is a Rosh Hashanah pasuk, and v'avarta shofar trua, which is a Yovel pasuk. Those are biblical. The need to do a truah. Yom truah yelachem, which we might have thought is the most central one by Rosh Hashanah. L'talmudo huba. That's coming l'talmudo. Now, what does l'talmudo mean? So what l'talmudo means here is basically what, if you take a look at Rashi, let me just try Rashi. The Talmuda who got, so this is exactly answering Charlie's point. It's about, I don't know where to tell you to look. It's like 20 lines from the bottom on the left-hand margin. The line starts with the word from, in the Rashi is Litalmuda. It's the middle of a Rashi. The Talmuda who ba, says Rashi, Mufne l'gzeira shava. Shedarash trua l'gzeira shaveh. Ella, Ella shesofrim amrua kedei lahashvot malchit zichronot for shofrot l'tkiyot tehen. Okay, so Rashi says two interesting things. First of all, the meaning of the word gufo uba is really Charlie's question. How do you make gzeira shava trua trua? The pasuk is an extra. So the answer is, all right, you're right. You need one of those for the gzeira shava. So if you're using one of those for the gzeira shava, you don't get, you lose one of your truas. Mm-hmm. So one approach is you really only have two truas. Now it would be two truas in Rosh Hashanah and two in Yovel. The Gzeira Shava is saying you do apply them all to one another, but since one is used, so you get the idea of tekiah before and after, but you get the idea of, of using a shofar, but you only get two, you don't get three. Now Rashi says, so why did we say three? Right? Why not two? So Rashi says an interesting thing. I would have said we say three because at the end of the day, there's three truas in the pasuk, even if technically you used one. But Rashi ends by saying something very interesting. Rashi makes it sound, and there are a number of Rashis that are like this, that basically make it sound, and we'll get to this later today as well, that Malchiot, Zichronot, and Shofrot are really a biblical concept on Rosh Hashanah. We learn it out from Psukim, but we tend to think that, come on, anything that's liturgy is really rabbinic, okay? But it's not, but Rashi says, and that is an approach, and it's going to be based on a Gemara later on, but Rashi actually says, no, there really is a biblical idea of saying Malchiot, Zichronot, and Shofrot on Rosh Hashanah. So if you start with that is core, and then but there's only two sets of tekiyot, so well, you need to have a tekiah for each one of the Malchut Zichronot over. Let's add another set of tekiah, trua tekiah. Okay, but that again, because of these things are intertwined, Malchut Zichronot and Shofar with tekiah, like we've learned earlier, like Rabbi Akiva says in Meina Tokei Lama Hu Maskil and so on. It becomes interesting that at the biblical level, according to Rashi, there's Malchut Zichronot and Shofros and two sets of tekiyot. Right, at the biblical level, you have both, but you don't actually have them fully intertwined because you don't have a one-to-one correspondence, and the rabbis had to add a third one in order to make like a full correspondence. Okay, so yes.
What does Rashi mean, Ella? In other words, he's saying that it's Musneh L'Gzeira Shava, so that
there's really only two.
So true is based in those psukim.
There's really only two sets of trua tekiah trua right. biblically, but the rabbis felt a need to add a third one in order to have that correspond one set.
The third one. The third trua.
In order that each one of the Malchut Zichronot and Shofar should have a set of tekiyot associated with it.
That is really interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so now back to the Gemara. Okay. Rabbi Shmuel, so the first wide line. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani amar Rabbi Yonasan. Achas midivrei Torah. Actually, only one set is biblical. V'shtay midivrei Sofrim. Two are rabbinic. V'avartai shofar truah midivrei Torah, which is quite fascinating. The one biblical set of tekiyot on Rosh Hashanah is learned from Yovel. Got that? V'avartai shofar truah. That's the biblical one. Shabson zichron truah v'yom yelachem l'talmuda huba. The other two are used for other things. So the Gemara says, "My l'talmuda huba." What do you mean used for other things? We get that one of them is used for Gzeira Shava, but what's the other one used for? So the Gemara says, "Mibaya b'yom below b'layla." No, you need Yom Truah Yelachem. You can't use the Truah there to teach you another set because you need the word Yom. I don't know why. Sometimes the Gemara uses every single word in the pasuk, but okay. But you need the word Yom to teach you that you only blow during the day, not at night. So therefore, Yom Truah Yelachem can't get used to teach you another set of tekiyot. So the Gemara says, "V'idach." How about the one that says you don't need it for that, and you can use Yom Truah to teach you another set of tekiyot? B'yom v'yom v'lo b'layla minale. Where does he know day and not night? Naftalei mi b'yom ha'kippurim. Since we're learning out, Rosh Hashanah and Yovel, you can use a pasuk from somewhere else. So you can learn out the idea of tekiyos during the day from the Yovel pasuk from b'yom ha'kippurim. So the Gemara says, 1 minute. Imi b'yom ha'kippurim. If you're already learning things out from Yovel, and you're learning at day and at night, Yoliv, so then Nigmar Nami Minei L'Pshuta L'Achra. Remember, this is the Tana that learns the idea of Tekiah before and after from the Chatzotrot, from Utkatem Tru'ah. But if he's already learning things out from Yom Kippur, like the idea of day and not night, So why not do what the first Tana did and learn out the other drasha of Tekiah before and after from Yom Kippur? So the Gemara says no. The avarta taviru lo mashmalu. He doesn't think the word avarta and taviru means do a Tekiah. He'd rather not learn out, right? That was the weak part, I think, of the previous drasha. Since when does havarta mean do a Tekiah? So he would rather learn out utkatem trua yitkeu. But he doesn't deny the idea that you learn from Yom Kippur. And one of the things you learn from Yom Kippur, first of all, one thing you have to learn is that you use a shofar, not a chatzotra. But one of the other things you learn from Yom Kippur is daytime, not nighttime. And therefore, only one of the truas is used, and two are still biblical. Okay, so the Gemara says like this. So what does he do with the havarta if it doesn't mean to make a tekiah? Havarta kil Rav Masna, like Rav Masna. Damar Rav Masna, the havarta derech avarato. You do it the normal way. It is like carried, which Rashi says means, or the way it's normally like transported on the animal. So Rashi says like to exclude the idea of like turning it inside out or blowing from the wide end, and having it come out of the of the narrow end. Again, I don't know exactly how that derech havarata. I mean, when the animal carries it, the small end goes first, and the wide. I don't know. Anyway, fine. Okay. Anyway, taviru dekama rachmana na'avri biyad, and taviru that the Torah says is you might have thought it means. So another way of learning this, so taviru, that maybe taviru means like hand it over. Maybe it doesn't actually mean blast it, like to pass over, to transport. So no, so it actually says v'avarta and taviru, because if it would just said one v'avarta, you would have thought it meant maybe to transport it. So it says taviru to repeat it to tell you no, it means something else. It means to actually blow it. So anyway, v'avarta and taviru are not telling you tekiah. They're telling you something else. The either to Rav Masna, and the other one who learns that taviru and havavarta to mean tekiah, where does he know Rav Masna's idea? Midushani be dibure, because it uses a slightly different version of the same word. And you could have said vavarta, and it says varvarta ta'aviru. And taviru biyadlu matis amris, and you could not say that ta'aviru means to hand over. The Gamar avara mimosha, because we know what the word ta'aviru means. We know it from Moshe. It says, so it says there, it's clear, it means that they sounded a voice. The same way there means to sound, fine. So therefore, you need that the Havarta and Taviru tells you Tia before and after. You know Rav Masna that it doesn't mean that means to do it in a certain way, not to reverse it because it uses a slightly different version of the verb in the second time, and you know that it does not mean just to transport, because that's what the word means. If you look at other places, the word in this context clearly means to sound. Okay. Anyway, what we have though here newly introduced, besides the idea of a different source of tekiah before and after from the Chatzot wrote, what we also do have is the idea that not all three sets are biblical, which is a pretty radical idea for us. We tend to assume all three are, but the Rishonim sometimes do play with this idea and say, maybe we even paskin this way. Our assumption is, of course, that all three sets are biblical. The other thing, just to think interestingly, is, besides that, okay, technically this gets us where we're going, how much should this influence how we think about sort of the symbolism of what the shofar is about? Like I've been using to discuss the difference between a tekiah and a trua, the difference that we have by the Chatzot, right? And so that, now you could say, even if we learn it from Yovel, that the Chatzot and what a trua is and what a tekiah is, we can still learn from there. But nevertheless, it's an interesting question of like where we anchor our frame of reference when we're thinking about the shofar. Do we think about shofar, that's sort of like what they did by the Chatzot wrote, and then maybe, by the way, you also understand the association of shofar with tefillah, right? Because like it says, when you bring your korbanot, right, you do the shofar. So there's this idea of intertwining with this reaching out to God and so on, and it's very much about crying out to God, rejoicing to God. If you anchor yourself in the world of Yovel, the idea of shofar by Yovel is that you're making an announcement to the people, right? So maybe that puts a different focus on what the shofar of Rosh Hashanah is. Again, going to that question: is it calling out? Is it blowing the shofar? Is it reaching to God, or is it hearing the shofar and it's being sending us a message? So your frame of reference here can really matter in addition to just the technical learning out. Also, the whole question of where we know Malchut, Zichronot, and Shofrot, right? Do we know Malchut, Zichronot, and Shofrot from Psukim directly about Rosh Hashanah, right? With the Zichron, Trua, Ani Hashem Elokeichem U'Bachodesh HaShvi'i, that was one set of drashot, or do we learn it from the Chatzotzrot, which again anchors us in some of those, that sort of frame of reference? Yes.
Is there any korban, not including the birds? Is there any korban that doesn't have a horn? That's not a horned animal. They're all horned animals. Right?
Yeah, other than the birds.
So the association with the korban.
I mean, there's mincha, which is also a type of a korban. Right, yeah.
There's association.
So that's interesting.
Makes us as human beings the vicarious bleeding of the animal.
It's interesting, except of course that the actual thing that was done with the korban was chatzotzrot, was not the horns. So,
right.
But it is interesting. But again, the horn of evoking of a korban.
And shift from mikdash,
right, and we talk about the horn as like the ayil and Yitzchak and so on.
Yeah.
So that's also a good point. Okay, so now the Gemara continues. Okay. Well, the high tiny demaisi leimi midbar, and for the Tana who learns it out from the Chatzotzrot. Why don't we say imal hala Chatzotzros afkan Chatzotzrot? How do you know that you don't use Chatzotzros? Talmud Lamar. So now you could have said you know it from Yovel, but again remember that although in the end we did say you learn out the idea of day and night from Yovel, this Tana is trying to avoid Yovel as the source. So if he's avoiding Yovel as the source, where does he know the idea of shofar? So Talmud Lomar Tiku b'chodesh shofar b'kesel yom chageinu. Blow on the chodesh a shofar when our holiday is covered up. Eizu chodesh hakodesh miskasabo, which is the holiday that the new moon is not visible. Haviyomeh zeh Rosh Hashanah. So it's Rosh Hashanah v'kamer Rachman shofar. So that's a classic pasuk. Of course, it's in Tehillim.
Yeah.
But Charlie always gets upset with that. But you say Gilui Milsa. It's not telling you something new. It's just clarifying that the trua that was meant was always a trua with a shofar. Okay. So that's the drasha. Now we're going to go back to the idea of 3 sets of 3, but we've already introduced 2 possibilities of what a trua is. So let's take a look. Itkin Rabbi Yavo b'Kaisari. Rabbi Yavo made a takana in Caesarea. Tkiya shlosha shvarim teruah tkiya. He was the first one that combined the 2 types of truot, and he did tkiya shvarim trua tkiya. Okay, so the Gemara doesn't understand this. Manavshach, make up your mind. If trua means a wailing, so the avi tkiya trua tkiya, then just do that version. If it means a moaning, the avi tkiya shlosha shvarim tkiya v'tkiya. So do tkiya shvarim tkiya. Why are you doing both? Where did that come from? So the Gemara says misafkale. No, he's got a doubt. He doesn't know which one, so he figures do both. Okay, so now it's important. At this stage, the Gemara is not suggesting that Shvar and Trua is itself the legitimate sound, but you're doing both options. It's like pick one. Tkiya, now here's A or B, pick one, Tkiya. Okay, so we're just folding it all in and being Yotzei everyone. So the Gemara doesn't like that. So Maskifla, which is a very reasonable read of what he did, but the Gemara is going to object. Maskifla, Rabbi Avira, so Rabbi Avira challenged it. V'dilma yilule have. 1 minute. Maybe if it's trua, then the shvarim is interfering, is getting between the tkiya and the trua. So this is the idea that it has to be a set that is not interrupted with a foreign sound. So the Gemara says, being trying with tkiya. So it says the hadar. Did I say? The hadar avi tkiya trua tkiya. Okay, fine. He didn't just do tkiya shram trua tkiya. He also did tkiya trua tkiya. But you're still not solving the shvarim problem. Maskifla ravina v'dilma ginuchay ganach. Maybe it's the moaning, the shvarim. The kamafsik trua being shram tkiya, and the trua is getting in the way. Okay, fine. The hadar avi tashat. So he did trua shvarim trua. So he didn't just do trua shvarim trua trua. Tkiya shvarim trua tkiya. He did tkiya shvarim tkiya, and he did tkiya trua tkiya. So now we're saying he did everything by itself. Because now again,
Covering all bases.
it's reasonable to think that Rabbi did not buy into this idea that a foreign sound can interfere. And then it's a nice way of just being Yotzei everything. But the Gemara has this idea and therefore has to insist that he did all those sets independently. But if that's true, then why did he bother to combine it within this approach? So the Gemara says, Eli Rabbi Yavo my itkin. What was the point of his takana? Ignu chiganach ha'avdei. If it's moaning, shvarim, you're saying he did that by itself. If it's wailing, if it's true up, ha'avdei, he did that by itself. So the Gemara says, Mesafkale. No, he doesn't know. Dilma ginuach ganach v'yalil. He's got a third possibility. So it's not like he was trying to solve the other two. It's sort of like, who was it that introduced, was it Rav Goren, this nusach achid in Israel? Do you know this? He said, we shouldn't have Sfardim and Ashkenazim and different nuschaot in Israel. We should just have one unified nusach. He introduced this nusach achid that combines, the two. Now we have 3 nuschos. So therefore, it's not like he combined them. Or maybe he tried to combine them, but we got in the way, and now we're saying it's a third one. Dilma, so, where was it? Dilma, ganach v'yalio. Maybe it's the moaning and the wailing. It's a third possibility. He says, once we're trying to say there's more possibilities, we have inami ibcha. Why don't you do the opposite? Tkiya trua shlosha shvarim tkiya. Maybe it's true shvarim, not just shvarim trua. Maybe the sound is wailing followed by moaning. So the says no. Stama de milsa himatra beinish milsa. The normal way it is, if something bad, a tragedy happens to a person, the reisha ganach v'hada yalil. First you moan and then you wail. You go like that. So that's the moaning followed by the wailing, and not the wailing followed by the moaning. So that's what. So the Gemara has now said that rather than solving the problem, we now have got three new sets. It really has introduced the idea that if you're concerned about the different opinions, you have to do independent sets. You can't combine them. So that therefore leads to tkiya. Tkiya, trua, tkiya. Right, so you're going to do 3 of those because maybe it's trua. That's one possibility. Now we're going to say, but there's also the possibility of shvarim. So that's another set. And now we've turned Rabbi Avahu into a solution, into a conflation, into a third possibility. Okay, so therefore that gets us, in order to be yotzei, we're going to do all 3 of these 3 sets. If we're going to call this 2. Now, there's actually an interesting halachic debate. You call shvarim trua 2 or 1. Is do you have a breath between the shvarim and the trua part, right? We tend not to. We don't do it with an interruption. So technically, really, it is 1 sound. But to get nice round numbers, we're going to count it as 2. Okay. So then you've got 9, 9, and 12. So you've got 30. That gives us 30 sounds. This is what we make before we start the Shemona Esrei. How do you get to our 100 sounds? Okay, let's talk about that for a minute. So basically, the real question is, why do we do this before the Shemona Esrei? What we really should do in the Shemona Esrei is we really seen that the Tkiyos belong as part of the Shemona Esrei. So there's a whole question of how this developed. Most Rishonim associate this thing of coming independent with the Gemara we learned like a few weeks ago, which is why Tokenim Marin Kishen Yoshrin, the Tokenim Marin Kishen Omdim, and associate this with an idea of what's called Kiyas de Miyushav. It doesn't literally mean we're sitting. Most people are standing, but in theory we're sitting because you don't have to be standing for Shemona Esrei. It's not part of the Amidah. Okay, so associate with this with a minhag that developed later, doing it separately. I've already spoken about how the stuff you do before the Shemona Esrei could be more about hearing the shofar. During the Shemona Esrei, it's more about blowing. It's incorporated into the Shemona Esrei. It's a type of tefillah. Also, once we extract it from the Shemona Esrei, we then, the brachot of the tkiyot are malchus, tichonin, and shofrot. That's explicit in the Mishnayot. That's obviously the assumption here. But once we've extracted it from the Shemona Esrei and made it separate, we then have to come up with, what bracha are we making, especially if we're doing it first. And that's where the birchas hamitzvah came of lishma kol shofar, but that came only post Gemara. So one question is having it before and then during, but that's what we do. So we have it before and during, we've got 60. Okay? How do you get 100? So the normal way you get 100 is, and this is the Sephardi minhag, is that actually you do it twice during the Shemona Esrei. You do it during the Shemona Esrei during your silent tefillah, and we're going to see that indicated in a minute in the Gemara. And then you do it again in the repetition of the Shemona Esrei. So it's a little bit hard in your silent tefillah because everybody has to be sort of like synchronized.
Fantastically.
Right.
I'm always
How do you synchronize?
You
Get to learn what the rhythms are and about when to expect it. Is there like a clock to know to hit like we're going to be there in 2 minutes? No, you just stop in the middle of Shemona Esrei and all of a sudden you hear it's Kina.
But it's you feel the rhythm of all the people around you. It's a very hard to explain. It's very powerful.
Yeah.
I go to the Century and they blow during the silent Shemona Esrei.
They do?
I'm always behind.
Right.
I'm never even close.
So anyway, so for that, the 60 then becomes a 90, okay, which is basically 30 before, 30 during the, that's called Tkiya to Miyushav. Then 30 during, which is during the silent Amidat, Tfilas Lachash, and 30 during the, what did I just do? 30
It's
during
right to left.
Chazarat Hashas. And then 90, it's so close to a nice round number of 100. So we're going to do 10 after, and that's going to give us, and we'll do one of each set, and then we're going to do 10 to round up 100. And, there have sources of where you get the idea of trying to have 100 kolot. We have 100 brachot b'kol yom anyway. So that's how that comes out. For the Ashkenazim that tend to only do it during the repetition of the Shemona Esrei, we just add 40 afterwards. But all of these are like later minhagim. The Gemara, even at this point, the Gemara only would get you to 30. You have to combine it with the earlier Gemara of Tkiyas to Miyushav to get 60. Then you have to add an idea of in both parts, both silent and repetition, and so on. But that's how it develops. I do want to say something else about the Tkiyot during Shemona Esrei, and why we do it differently. Here we do it differently, but during the Shemona Esrei, during the Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros, right? What do we do? What Tkiyot do we do at the end of Malchios? Do we do tarat, tarat, tarat 3 times? No. What do we do? Tashrat. What order do we do? We do tashrat at the end, right? Tarat, tashat, tashat, and tarat. Right? That's what we do for each one of them. Why do we do one of each? It should be self-evident. Why don't we just do 3 tarats here, 3 tashats here, and 3 tashrats there?
Cover all the possibilities.
Right, because for each one of them, you want the right set. So therefore, since for each one of them you want the right set, you do one of each. Why here do we do them all together? Because here as well, you want the mitzvah to all come together. So either this is the mitzvah, or this is the mitzvah, right? Or this is the mitzvah. One of them you're doing the mitzvah, right? If you did here, tarat, tashat, tarat, tarat, tashat, tashat, then in between the mitzvah acts, you're doing these weird things. So here, okay, it's true. If it's down here, you did those other things, but it's not like, it's not like getting in the middle of it. It's like before it. But when you get to the mitzvah thing, whichever one is the mitzvah, you're doing it all combined. Okay, so that's why these are combined and these are one of each. Is that clear? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. The other thing I do want to say is that there was an interesting position in the Rav Haigon, I believe, records, that you would only say by Malchus Zichrono and Shofrot, you would only do one. You would only do Tarat, Tashat, Tashrat. You would not do a total of 10, 10, 10. This would be the whole thing. So the question is, but how can that be the whole thing? Right? What about the fact that you don't know which is the right one, right? How can you just do one here? 2 out of the 3 are not getting the right ones. So there's 2 answers to that. One answer is that that he basically, I forget. I think it's Rav Sadiq, I'm forgetting. It's one of the Yonim. It might be Rav Hai. Anyway, no, I think it's Rav Sadiq. Anyway, he basically says that it's really not a safek. Really, since any of those are legitimate ways of expressing moaning and tru'ah, any one is fine. And therefore, this also works. Of course, the question is, it doesn't work with our Gemara, because our Gemara sounded like, oh, this is a suffix, this is a suffix, you had to do this, you had to do that, right? And here he's suggesting, maybe going back to like the pre-Stam's rereading of Rebbe Yavahu, he's suggesting the idea that like, any one of these is legitimate. It's not one or the other. That's one interesting idea. It's not the way we paskin. But the other idea, and this is important, this is what the Ramban says. The Ramban says is if you're doing Tkiyas to Miyushav, you've already been Yotzei the mitzvah. and the mitzvah, therefore, and here you've got your full complement, you know, whatever it was, you did each one of the possibilities. Here he says, the reason you're doing Tekiyas in the Shemona Esrei is no longer to be Yotzei the Tekiyot. To be Yotzei the Tekiyot, you did it. The reason you're doing the Tekiyot in Shemona Esrei is to give a punch to your tefillah. Right? It's not for the sake of the Tekiyot, it's for the sake of the Shemona Esrei. Since it's for the sake of the Shemona Esrei, it doesn't have to be the exact right Tekiyah. Any interpretation is valid here because it's not so much about the mitzvah of Tekiyat Shofar. The mitzvah of Tekiyat Shofar you did here. Here it's about Tekiyat Shofar as part of the Shemona Esrei, and therefore it's not as formally defined. So that's an interesting concept. The reason, again, I mention it is because it emphasizes the idea of two ways of understanding the Tekiyot. Tekiyot is part of Shemona Esrei, Tekiyot is separate, or the relationship of Tekiyot and Malchiyot, Zichronot, and Shofrot. Right? Is Malchiyot, Zichronot, and Shofrot coming to frame the meaning of the Tekiyot, but the focus is on Tekiyot, whereas Malchiyot, Zichronot, and Shofrot fundamentally central to the Tefillah, and the Tekiyot are a way of conveying the Malchiyot, Zichronot, and Shofrot two very different ways, also indicated by the Rashi we did earlier, right? Malchiyot, Zichronot, and Shofrot you start with, but then the rabbis wanted a set of Tekiyos with each one, so they gave you three instead of two, So that is very much, it's a question which is the Ikar and which is like the Tafel. Okay, so now we continue.
Look at the second to last line in the Rashi on Ganche.
Yeah.
He says this means in the French there's something like.
Oh yeah. I meant to mention that.
Complain.
Yeah. I don't know exactly what that French meaning is, but right. Rashi says Ginichot aruchot complainer, complainia. Yeah, I didn't know exactly. Yeah. I noticed that. Okay. Anyway, back to the Gemara. So now getting back to the Mishnah. If the Tekiyah at the end of one thing was twice as long, it can't count as the last Tekiyah of one set and the first Tekiyah of the next set. I'm Rabbi Yochanan. Said Rabbi Yochanan. Shama Teisha Tekiyot, Teisha Sha'ot Yom Yatsa. If you heard 9 Tekiyot, one meaning 9 kolot, Tekiya, Trua, Trua. But you heard those 9 sounds, each one at a different hour of the day, widely spread out. You're Yotzei, Tanya Nami Hachi, we taught similarly. Shama Teisha Tekiyot, Teisha Sha'ot Yom Yatsa. Okay, now, by the way, somebody showed him say, 1 minute. A minute ago we said that if you got a Shvar in the way or True in the way, it's no good. Now you're telling me you can have an hour between each one? And the Ramban's answer to this is, yes, there's a big difference. One is basically just saying that to be a set, they don't have to be juxtaposed in time. Okay, but at least we can take a step back and say you had a Tekiya, a True, and a Tekiya over 3 hours. The other is if you get a wrong sound in the middle, then you define the set differently. You can't, once you try to pull it all together, you have some foreign thing there. It's a different type of a set. Okay, so actually, that you can both say you can hear it over a long period of time, but still say that getting a wrong sound makes it worse, redefines what type of a set it is. Okay, so that's one point. Adam ke'achad lo yatsa. Now there is some debate, I should say, about that first teaching, whether we pass it that way, because there's other Gemaras that speak about a more tighter, so like Rabbi Yehuda's position is you can't even have a breath between them. Mm-hmm. So there is different opinions about how much you can space them out. Now, Mitesha B'nei Adam Ke'achad, there's a question of the gears, I'll read it with our gears, so Lo Yatsa. If you had 9 people making each one, 3 of them doing Truaz and 6 of them doing Tekiyaz at the same time, you're not Yotzei. Now, the question is, well, why not? So Rashi says, what do you mean? Didn't we say that Trei Kali is Mishtame, if you want to focus in? So there's 2 easy answers to this. One is maybe I could focus in on one voice by sort of like ignoring all of the surrounding voices. I can't simultaneously focus on 9 different voices. That's point number 1. I can block out the others, but I can't simultaneously focus on 9. The other point is that, and the point Tosos makes is, if it's all at the same time, you're not having them in the right types of sets. It has to be Tekiya, Trua, Tekiya. It has to be one followed by the next. Here, by all simultaneous, you're not getting those proper sets of 3. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's why you're not Yotzei. Tekiya mizeh v'Trua mizeh yatsa. However, if over 9 hours, at first, Reuven did the first Tekiya, Shimon did the second, Levi did Levi did the third. That would be fine. You could have different people as long as it's in the right sequence. Even remember the word serugin we had before by Rebbe's, what do you call it? Maidservant. So here's even spread out over a long period of time, coming in chunks. Afilu kol yom kulo, even spread out over the whole day, similar to the idea of over 9 hours in a day. Okay. Umiyamar Rabbi Yochanan Hachi, does Rabbi Yochanan really say that? Rabbi Yochanan Yishim ben Yehotzadak, B'Halil B'Megillah Im Shahakadei Ligmor et Kula Chozer LeRosh. By Hallel and Megillah, if you took a break and you had that blank space, of not saying anything, if the amount of that was separating the first half and the second half was the time it would take to say the whole Hallel or the whole Megillah, that creates a break, and you would have to start again from the beginning. You cannot combine the two halves. So the Gemara says, so this is a question, a hefsek of silence, is it a hefsek or not? So the Gemara says, lo kasha, that's not a problem. Hadidei had Rabbi. You could have made a difference between Halo versus Kiot, but the Gemara is making a difference between, one is his Rebbe, that was in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yehotzadak. He said that if you have a hefsek of silence, it would break it up. Rabbi Yochanan himself says a hefsek of silence is not a problem. Okay, so the Gemara says, "Lo, are you telling me he himself is not bothered by this?" Rabbi Avo have a shaki vaza basrei to Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Avo was like walking after Rabbi Yochanan. And he was saying the Shema. And kimatalim mevaot mitunafot. And then he got to like alleyways which were smelly, and maybe even people had used to relieve themselves with, whatever. So ishtik. He didn't say he stopped saying the Shema. Basar de Chalif, after it passed by, maybe it also means after they were no longer in the, could smell it, so, and they left. Amarle, so then he said to Rabbi Yochanan, Mo ligmor, can I now finish the Shema? Amarle, and Rabbi Yochanan said back to him, Im shahita kedei ligmor eskula chozer l'rosh. If it's been the time it takes from the time you stopped saying it till now, was the time it would take to say the whole Shema, then that's an interruption, and then you have to go back to the beginning. So don't you see that Rabbi Yochanan himself is bothered by this idea of even a stam interruption? Of course, again, you could make a difference, that it's one thing if you can't say it because you're not allowed to say it. You're in a space where it's actually cannot be said. That can create more of a sense of a break than just choosing not to say it. But anyway, that's not the place the Gemara is going to go. The Gemara says, you see here that he says that a break is a problem. So the Gemara says, where is it? Hachi kamar late. This is what he says. Lididi, as far as my personal opinion goes, low severely. I don't hold that this whole thing is a problem. Now Rashi, by the way, points out there are two reasons I don't hold it's a problem. Because if you look in Brachos, Rabbi Yochanan says that if you get to a smelly alleyway, just cover your mouth and continue saying it. He actually allows you to continue saying it. So he says, look, first of all, I would have said you could have continued saying it even when you were there. Second of all, I don't hold that a break in time is a break. According to you, that you've got a problem. A, you think you weren't allowed to say it there. B, because you're asking me, clearly you feel that a break in time is a problem. So if it was the time where it took the whole thing, you would have to go back. So this becomes a question, is a break of silence a break or not? And we're making it into a fundamental issue. We're not distinguishing between the cases. Could you have said it if you wanted to or not? Is there a difference between Megillah versus, let's say, Shofar? We're assuming it's all the same, and we're basically saying Rabbi Yochanan says it isn't a problem. Rabbi Avo and Rabbi Yochanan's Rabbi Yehotzadak says that it is a problem.
It's really interesting.
Okay, yeah.
Because the whole thing is about voice.
Right. That, of course, the point is, I'm waiting for Rabbi Yochanan to say when he said, "Oh, can I now go back and say it?" He should have said, "Well, if you hadn't asked me the question, now that you spoke." But apparently, that's another issue about when you speak and it's relevant, right? It's like after you wash and you say, like, "I need the salt, have the salt," or whatever. So that's a voice that's a relevant voice. So there really are like three scenarios. They're speaking something extraneous, there's silence, and then they're speaking something that's relevant. Okay, but yes, the assumption is that speaking something extraneous is the worst, and that goes back to the point that a wrong sound is worse than a silence. Okay, but the silence is what we're dealing with, and is that a hefsek or not?
My teenage boys for years drove Nancy crazy. We washed Friday nights at the table, and then they all start talking. Yima, this looks like a really nice challah. Oh, here's the salt.
I don't know if I would say all of that was litzorech, but okay, moving on. So the Gemara says like this. Now, what we'll end today with one important brighter that gets back to this issue of the relationship of the tkiyot to the brachot. Tanu Rabbanan, tkiyot ein ma'akvot zu et zu. The tkiyot do not prevent one from the other. which is a very bizarre statement. It sounds like you're Yotze with some of the Tkiyot, without all of them. Okay? So we'll take a look at what the Gemara, Ein Makvot Zuetzu. Brachot, Ein Makvot Zuetzu. Okay? So, and the Brachot do not hold back one another, which also is bizarre. Like you can say some of the Brachot without saying the others. So let's keep on reading. Tkiyot Brachot Shel Rosh Hashanah Shel Yom Kippurim Me'akvot. Oh, so thank you. But if we're talking about Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur meaning Yovel, then you have to do all the Tkiyot. Then you have to do all the brachot, all the malchut zichronos and Yovel. So which things are not ma'akev zuetzu? So Rashi says there's one third scenario which we keep on ignoring, which we'll get to when we do Tanis of Tkiyot and brachot, which is Ta'anit. On the fast days for rain, they would do Tkiyot, right? And they have Chatzotzrot. You remember before actually Chatzotzrot would be more central, which is when it's a bad time, etc. And there they would also have brachot. Some even would say they would have malchut and zichronot there, or zichronot and shofarot. There's a debate which brachot. So there you can say some of the brachot without saying all. You can say some of the tkiyot without saying all. But on Rosh Hashanah and Yovel, you have to do all of the brachot, all of the tkiyot. Okay, so why? Amar Rabbi, Amar Kodesh Baruch Hu. So here's the idea of why each they're all sort of needed. Imru lefanai Rosh Hashanah malchiot zichronot b'shofarot. Malchiot kadei shetamlichuni aleichem. Malchiot to make me your king. Zichronot kadei sheyavod zichronechem letovah. Lefanai zichronechem letovah. Zichronot that I should remember you for good. And ubameh with what b'shofar. Now, which is the shofarot. So that presumably is being brought to explain why you need malchiot, zichronot, and shofarot all to come together. Presumably why you need the tkiyot all to come together is like we said before. We learn out from the psukim that there are 3 sets and you need all of them. Okay, but I have to point out to you again, because we've been talking about Rashi and how the emphasis Rashi has on the brachot. Rashi reads Ma'akvot zu et zu by Rosh Hashanah a little bit differently. Not that you need to do all the tkiyot and you can't just do some, and you need all the brachot and you can't just do some, but that the tkiyot are ma'akev the brachot, and the brachot are ma'akev the tkiyot. And you can't do one without the other. If you take a look at Rashi, about 20 lines on the bottom where it says Tkiyot, he says Ubrachot ta'alma kigon taniyot. That's the case where it is a problem. Ein ma'akvin zuetzu im birach velo taka. So by ta'anit, you can't do you can do the brachot without the tkiyot and vice versa. But on Rosh Hashanah, what is Rashi saying? You absolutely must do the brachot together with the tkiyot. Now the problem is, what do you mean? The Mishnah said if you did the Shmona Esrei without the tkiyot, you go ahead and you do the tkiyot separate. At least b'di'evan you can do it separate. So the basic answer that they give to Rashi is, it is true b'di'evan you can do it separate. Rashi is not saying you're totally not Yotzei. The Mishnah says if you didn't have it, you do the tkiyot after. But what Rashi is saying is that, and this goes back to a position of Rashi that sort of keeps on repeating itself, that he really understands that malchut, zichronot, and shofrot are a biblical idea, and they're a biblical idea to be intertwined with the tkiyot. So at some certain biblical level, the full mitzvah of shofar is only done when you have the malchut, zichronot, and shofrot together with the tkiyot. When you separate it, then you maybe are dealing with like a lower level of a mitzvah. We'll discuss that a little bit more tomorrow, but you are not dealing with the full mitzvah. The full mitzvah, even at a biblical level, requires both of them coming at the same time. And so it's very important, again, the way Rashi is continuously emphasizing the importance of malchut, zichronot, and shofrot, and we'll see this play out also in the first sugya we will do tomorrow. Okay, when we will finish this Masechet.